Syria's longest river has receded, parching trees and leaving families of local farmers without water to drink. Aid group.
Before, the water level in the reeds were much higher, a good 2 meters higher. Now everything is dry. My buffalo have nothing left to eat. I have to go and buy them feed now.
The Euphrates has carried civilization on its back for millennia. It is a river of history, one of the great waterways where cities rose, empires expanded, and people learned to farm, trade, and build. It appears again and again in the Bible, as a boundary, as part of Eden's memory, and in apocalyptic imagery, as a river with prophetic weight. Today, many people are watching the Euphrates closely because its flow has changed dramatically in parts. Where the water used to lap reed beds and feed fields, exposed banks and cracked mud are now visible. Villagers speak of dwindling catches, failing crops, and the need to haul in animal feed from farther away. At the same time, as the river pulls back, stones and structures long hidden beneath the current are coming into view. What both the science and the stones tell us is a story shaped by human choices, climate, and history, and for many observers, that story resonates with deeper meanings. A short tour through the river's identity helps explain why its current state commands attention. The Euphrates rises in the mountains, winds through fertile plains, and for centuries marked the edges of successive kingdoms. In the Genesis narrative, the Euphrates is one of the 4 primeval rivers, part of the portrait of a garden at the dawn of human history. In later biblical writing, it appears as a border of empires and a site of future drama in Revelation. In classical and modern histories alike, the Euphrates was a spine of irrigation and transport that made agriculture and urban life possible across the Near East. In short, to lose or to see the river altered is to see a central lifeline of the region change, and that has material and symbolic consequences. Why is the Euphrates retreating in many stretches? The short answer is that multiple causes feed into the condition. Human engineering is a major factor. Dams and reservoirs built upstream alter how much water reaches downstream communities. These structures store water for hydroelectric power and irrigation. In dry seasons, they may hold back flows needed by lower reaches. Agricultural expansion and growing urban demand also siphon water away. Over the last century, population and water use grew in countries along the river, and irrigation systems increased the river's burden. Climate patterns add another layer: reduced rainfall, hotter temperatures that increase evaporation, and changing seasonal cycles can all lower river volume. Droughts, some linked to broader patterns of climate variability, further compound the stress. The result is a mix of engineering decisions, policy choices, and environmental shifts that together change the face of the Euphrates. The human consequences are immediate and stark. Farmers who once relied on steady flows now struggle to irrigate fields. Fisherfolk report dwindling catches as habitats change. Pastoralists find less grazing near former watering places and must travel farther or buy feed at rising cost. Local economies that depend on the river, markets, mills, local trade, feel the squeeze. These practical hardships prompt community displacement, social stress, and political tension. Water scarcity is rarely just an environmental problem. It becomes a livelihood and security issue too. Alongside these practical effects, the exposed riverbed is yielding another kind of story. Archaeologists, local historians, and sometimes curious residents are finding structures, walls, and ruins that the rising waters once hid. Foundations of buildings, stone piers, fragments of pottery, and even what appear to be ancient river crossings are appearing where flow has receded. Each newly revealed object is a testimony to earlier ways of life. Towns that once thrived on the Euphrates, trade nodes that connected distant peoples, and ritual spaces where communities gathered. In regions with long human occupation, rivers are repositories of layered histories. When water retreats, it can uncover archaeological remains that help scholars reconstruct settlement patterns and trade routes. These archaeological findings require careful, methodical study. Surface finds can be tempting to interpret quickly, and local lore sometimes rushes to label sites as lost cities or prisons without excavation and dating. Yet even tentative reports of exposed walls or paved surfaces are valuable. They invite professional teams to record, sample, and conserve what emerges. The unplanned revelation of items demands both scientific discipline to date and contextualize artifacts and ethical care. Exposed antiquities can be vulnerable to looting and damage unless authorities and communities act to protect them. Beyond the immediate scientific and social dimensions, many faith communities read the river's changing face through a prophetic lens. Revelation 16 speaks of the Euphrates drying up to prepare the way for the kings from the east, and Revelation 9 mentions events associated with the river. For believers who take these texts seriously, a reduced Euphrates evokes the imagery of passages that link water and divine movement in dramatic terms. For them, the sight of a diminished Euphrates can feel like a sign, a wake-up call, or a reminder of larger narratives in which the world's political and spiritual structures are being rearranged. It is important, though, to hold a balanced approach when drawing such connections. Biblical prophecy has been read in many ways across the centuries. Some readers emphasize immediate fulfillment, others a symbolic trajectory of history, and still others warn against hastily mapping modern events onto ancient texts. A sober posture recognizes that natural explanations, dams, drought, water use, are meaningful and actionable. At the same time, for people of faith, events in nature often carry moral and spiritual resonance. The two perspectives need not be in conflict. Scientific understanding can inform responsible stewardship and policy, while spiritual reflection can motivate care, prayer, and ethical action. What practical responses should follow from the river's decline? On the policy side, cooperation among riparian nations is crucial. The Euphrates crosses political boundaries, and coordinated management of flows, equitable water sharing agreements, and investment in efficient irrigation techniques can mitigate shortages. Improving water use efficiency, switching to less water-intensive crops where appropriate, and restoring wetlands and headwater vegetation to reduce erosion and evaporation are all practical steps that blend conservation with livelihoods. At the community level, diversifying local economies so that households do not depend entirely on a single water source can reduce vulnerability. Where archaeological finds appear, governments and international agencies can support emergency documentation and protection measures to preserve heritage. There is also a moral dimension to the response. Rivers support human dignity. Their decline calls for empathy and responsibility. When communities suffer loss of crops and fish, the wider world can help through humanitarian relief, but ideally through long-term investment that strengthens resilience. International solidarity, technical support, and policies that respect both current needs and heritage are expressions of ethical concern. Spiritually, the river's changing course invites reflection. Rivers in sacred texts frequently function as symbols of life and death, of boundary and invitation, of trial and transformation. The Jordan, for example, marks both crossings and cleansings in biblical memory. The Euphrates holds similar layers of meaning. Seeing a great river draw back can foster sober contemplation, about temporality, how human achievements rise and fall, about dependence, how societies rely on natural systems, and about stewardship, what responsibilities people hold toward creation. For communities of faith, the moment can prompt prayer, repentance, and renewed commitment to care for creation, practical acts that echo spiritual convictions. At the same time, it is wise to avoid fear-mongering. Apocalyptic language can terrify and paralyze, or it can galvanize thoughtful action and compassion. Careful teaching can help communities interpret biblical imagery without surrendering to panic. Churches and mosques, civic groups and scholars all have roles to play in framing the situation responsibly, acknowledging suffering, advocating for practical solutions, and encouraging ethical choices. There is also room for hope in the midst of exposure. The uncovered stones and foundations are not only relics of loss, they are keys to deeper understanding. When archaeologists study them, they open new windows into how ancient people organized life around the river. When communities are supported through transition, adaptive practices can restore livelihoods and protect culture. When policymakers cooperate, cross-border tensions can turn into shared stewardship. In that sense, what appears as exposure can become an opportunity to learn to heal and to build more resilient relationships between people and the rivers they rely upon. Finally, the Euphrates moment is a call to a broader ethic, the recognition that human systems and natural systems are entangled. Modern dams and ancient canals, outdated irrigation habits and changing climate patterns, all these combine to shape what the river does. If the river's decline is to be addressed, solutions must be multidisciplinary: hydrologists, farmers, theologians, archaeologists, and policymakers working together. That kind of collaboration is rare but powerful. It recognizes that preserving a river is not only a technical task, but a moral and cultural one. So what might you do if you are watching these changes from afar? First, stay informed from reliable sources about the environmental and humanitarian dimensions. Second, support organizations that assist affected communities and protect cultural heritage. Third, reflect on your own water use and the ways small changes in consumption, advocacy, or charitable support contribute to larger networks of care. And finally, if you bring a spiritual perspective, allow the moment to shape prayerful action, care for neighbors, care for creation, and care for the memory the river holds. The Euphrates has always been more than a line on a map. It has been an artery of human story and a mirror of human responsibility. Where it runs thin, where its bed uncovers the past, we are offered a chance to act with wisdom. We can respond with science and solidarity, with conservation and covenant, with excavation that respects dignity and stewardship that honors the living river. In that response, there is both prudence and hope, the chance to preserve what remains, to learn from what emerges, and to live in a way that prepares for whatever comes next, with compassion for those who suffer now, and with care for the generations who will inherit what we leave behind.